Welcome back to the Web3 game development live stream. Today, we've got a really interesting program from a couple of CTOs that I totally respect. You're going to meet them in a moment. The topic today is decentralized physical infrastructure networks, DePIN, and how that affects the world of game development. But specifically, we're going to dive into this word that if you've hung out in Web3 for a while, you've heard it a million times, and that's composability. Sometimes, frankly, people don't even know what the heck they're talking about when they use this word. We're going to get into what composability really means, how it's going to allow us to build layer upon layer and include infrastructure and data and components into those layers in a way that goes beyond what you might be thinking of in terms of like open source. Open source is a form of composability where you can stack software on top of each other and save it and build new things from it. But composability in Web3 is even more than that because it encompasses more services. And then we'll talk about the implications of that, what we're going to be able to build next. So let me get into the intros, though. So I'm John Radoff. I'm the CEO of Beamable. We're a gaming infrastructure company. We are building a DePIN. And I am joined by Ali, the CTO of Beamable, and Ken Anderson, who is CTO of Tashi, which is building decentralized serverless tech as well for the game industry. So this is going to be a little more technical than we sometimes get. But whether you're a CTO or not watching this, I think you're going to learn a lot. I think you're going to add words to your vocabulary. You're also going to gain a real appreciation for how this whole new realm of innovation is going to shape the future of the internet generally and game development in particular. So let me give each of these folks a chance to introduce themselves. So Ken, why don't you go first? Tell me about Tashi and what you're doing and your own background that you brought to this.
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm Ken Anderson, CTO of Tashi. I was one of the founding employees of Hedera Hashgraph. And when I left Hedera about 3 years ago, I thought, what can we do with this technology? Like, what problem can we actually go solve with this tech? And we started off by rewriting the Hashgraph algorithm in Rust and optimizing it. And our proof of concept was a game. And that kind of opened our eyes. So we spent 2 years in R&D building the tech, doing product market fit, meeting with you guys, actually. So I think there was like a natural fit between what Beamable's doing and what Tashi's doing. But yeah, what we came to is basically a serverless, leaderless middleware for multiplayer gaming. You can think of it as just taking the server out of the multiplayer equation. And it's kind of grown from there because we added a DePIN to support reliability and consistency of that experience. And now it's like there's this new vision that's coming out of potentially we could have games that live beyond the developer's life, right? So it's turned into this forever game protocol. And I think the composability part's really exciting to me. I mean, we've been talking to you guys for a little over a year now. And using your software composability with the infrastructure play and the multiplayer middleware that we're doing, we're kind of composing both the software side and the infrastructure side into something that could potentially create these games that just last forever.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ken. And Ali, we know each other really, really well. And you've been on some of my programming in the past. Thanks for being on this morning. I couldn't think of anyone better to come and join me on this conversation about composability. Just share the quick background around yourself, though.
Sure. My background is essentially John's background at this point. So John and I have been working together since 2012. Even before Beamable, we built a game studio called Disruptor Beam, where we designed, built, and operated games like Game of Thrones Ascent, Star Trek Timelines, The Walking Dead March to War, and various others. So John's deep well of experience building games was sort of brought to the free-to-play live ops mobile era around then, and I joined him on that ride, and that was an extraordinary ride where we sort of had to build all the technology ourselves because it was sort of a new paradigm from boxed games to continuously operated games. And so over the course of several years, we built games, but we also built technology, and that technology that we built came to become the kernel that would seed Beamable as we know it today. So we like to think that we have an insider's perspective on making games and on building game technology, and around 2020, we basically created Beamable to bring all of that technology, similar to how Ken wanted to sort of leverage Hedera. We wanted to leverage this technology we built operating games to game developers out there. And since then, we've had thousands of game developers sign up. We've got over 80 games launched, hundreds of games actively developing, and the next logical step of our journey from providing these services to seeding up marketplace, which is when we started talking to Ken and Tashi, to now providing also a network for the infrastructure, has been a continuation from building games all the way to delivering these services and solving very real problems that are encountered by game developers out there. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Eli. So, I want to dive right into this topic of composability, and let's try to put a little definition on it, and also just distinguish it a little bit from its origins and maybe open source, and what we add to the open source ethos by having composability in Web3. I posted an article actually this morning because I thought this was something I really wanted to drill into deep. And I actually on my blog, maybe Oscar can cue it up at some point here, but definitely check out. Yeah, thanks, Oscar. Check out this post I made. It's composing the decentralized future of infrastructure. And I went really deep on this. I talked about open source. I talk about the idea of inter-DePIN composability, meaning some DePINs can work with other DePINs. The example I gave was in the early days of a project called Demo, which is collecting automotive information from cars, basically car utilization data. They actually used Helium, which is a wireless network that is also a DePIN. So DePINs can leverage each other. That's one example. But another is also creating the modularity within a DePIN project so that you can have a software layer where you add components on top of it. That's kind of what we're trying to get to with Beamable. But composability, I think, in Web3, the way I'm thinking about it, and I'm going to invite you to go first, Ken, and just share your own thoughts on this, is there's composable software, which is basically any kind of open source. It doesn't even have to be open source, frankly. It can be closed source. As long as you've got APIs and the ability to build one thing on top of another, you've got a form of composability. I think what's interesting in Web3, though, is the ability to also expose services, some of which may have a requirement to pay for them, right? Because when we talk about infrastructure level services and access to servers and scalable infrastructure and stuff, that's capital equipment that you're basically getting access to. It's not just building an API from one piece of software to another. And that's where Web3 gets interesting, because it's the idea that you can put these services out there and have this embedded value exchange mechanism, which is what blockchain enables. So it's the idea of software composability, but also infrastructure and the ability to tap into services that need to be paid for, or that people expect to be paid for because it's costing them money to make it available. That's sort of my broad definition of composability. What do you think of that, Ken? Add, subtract to it. Tell me where I'm wrong.
Well, yeah, I actually built an entire council called the Council of Decentralized Economies. That is a council of DePINs. And we really have two major mandates. The first mandate is to come up with a viability index. So we're doing a discount rate calculation on the viability of DePIN projects based off their actual business models instead of just hype. And so the second mandate is to determine integration standards. And it's both technical integration and economic integration. So I think that's the unique thing about Web3. In Web3, to your point, technical integration is easy. We can always create, sub APIs or references to APIs. We can always share API keys. I mean, we do that right now with what we've done with Beamable, right? And if you install Tashi, you have to get an API key, and then you have Beamable SDK, you have to have an API key, and then they work nicely together. So you have two API keys, and you can compose the Tashi and Beamable services and just follow the docs and figure that part out. But I think it gets more interesting when you need to leverage, as Beamable, infrastructure on somebody else's DePIN, and you want to make that either opaque or you can make it transparent. I mean, it's up to that. That's the cool thing about DePIN and Web3. But then the challenge becomes the economic integration. So the easy part, I think, is the technical integration. We've got, 50, 60 years of figuring out how to do that part when it comes to APIs and services. But the economic part is the hardest part. And this is where you talked about value exchange between ecosystems. I'm going to actually upgrade that term to value mutualization.
Okay.
And that's the objective of code, is how do we create value for every party in that value chain? How do we share that value in that value chain across projects such that the end user doesn't feel the friction of multiple tokens, but we're all benefiting from it? So how can somebody potentially use a Tashi token or our reward points in the Tashi platform and benefit on the Beamable network? And how can somebody be a Beamable customer and have credits on file that can be used to benefit them on the Tashi network? And all of that comes through an economic integration. So we're still in the early phases of figuring that out, but we've got a pretty cool model that's emerging right now.
And Ken, I would think that the ultimate layer beyond what you just described is the abstraction layer that makes it so that the people who are building applications don't even need to know about blockchain at all. Like all of that DePIN level integration, token exchange, value exchange can be abstracted away, because the last thing you want, by the way, is your end user, like the player of the game, shouldn't care at all. Like they shouldn't care about underlying blockchain implementation any more than they care about whether we use MongoDB or a SQL database on the back end. Like they literally should not even ever know. Like it's irrelevant to them. And I think that's sort of where blockchain needs to be. We need to get to the level of invisibility with blockchain for the vast majority of applications, unless you're a certain kind of developer who needs to be able to integrate it at that layer. Ali, let me give you a chance to jump in here, because that's a lot of what we've invested in at Beamable from the very beginning, is actually building abstraction layers to simplify a lot of back-end services, including blockchain. And we're kind of taking that to the next level as we build out our DePIN. So Ali, just like add to any of this description of composability so far and how you think about it.
Sure. Yeah. And Ken and I have talked about this at length, most recently at GDC, but also before that at DICE. I love the stuff that the Tashi folks are doing. And Ken is very knowledgeable on this stuff. And he's thought deeply about the economic incentives, which is awesome. And so as far as I'm concerned, look, there's really two flavors of composability as I think about it, from the perspective of Beamable and from the perspective of building a DePIN. There's sort of inter DePIN composability, that is DePINs collaborating with each other in some way, shape, or form through economic incentives and technical integration and leveraging DePINs for whatever their domain specialty is. And then there's intra DePIN composability. So within a particular DePIN, you may have composability. So in the case of Beamable, for example, one of the things that is really near and dear to our hearts is we discovered along the road of providing services and APIs to game developers that you could provide the best, most well-thought game service. Somebody's going to tell you that they want one extra bell or one extra whistle, right? And that's natural, because there's an infinite number of permutations, variations of a matchmaking service, a commerce service, and everybody has different needs. So part of our approach to that was to create a marketplace that we could seed and that other people could participate in, and create sort of this Cambrian explosion of microservices that game developers can adopt over the counter, almost like a back-end service asset store. Now, what we really wanted to do with that was to allow the creators to really foster a creator economy, and to allow the creators of these, multitude of microservices to get a benefit of that. And so today, really the only model that sort of works for this kind of composable backend services is a licensing model. But we wanted a usage model, because our model is a usage model. So that's where the DePIN comes in really handy. Imagine a world where Ken could write an amazing matchmaking service, put it out there, and then John's game studio can come adopt Ken's matchmaking service, and of course pay infrastructure costs to run that matchmaking service on the DePIN, and Ken gets a percentage of all of those network fees. Now what you've done is you've allowed a boom of creator-led services, and you allow sort of the most talented people, wherever they may be, to contribute services, not to just one studio, but to thousands, millions of studios out there. And so that's really hard to do without either overly centralizing in a way that erodes trust. And DePIN provides an answer to that. So that intra DePIN composability of other people can create services and benefit from their creations, and the entire economy of the DePIN grows. That's something that is that is of massive potential, and ultimately that's sort of what the cloud providers have done right to some extent. Of course, all of their services are internal and managed services, but part of what makes AWS and Azure and GCP so valuable is that once you learn it, you don't want to really spend time learning something new all over again. And there's all these services that have cost millions of dollars to make. So we want to be able to foster that same kind of ecosystem, but in a decentralized, DePIN-oriented way.
One of the things I observed with all of these big cloud providers, the hyperscalers, is they all have, obviously they have tremendous scale within their businesses, but despite that, there isn't really a true backend ecosystem that has emerged for a lot of verticalized services like in game development. You still tend to have cloud specific services. So for example, Amazon had GameSparks until they canceled it and got rid of it. And to this day, Azure has PlayFab, for example. And these are clearly lead gen mechanisms for them, also a certain amount of vendor lock-in that gets you onto their networks and keeps you there because it isn't easy to port away. But because of that, no one has really started building around those kind of ecosystems. Like if you create the ultimate matchmaking service, just as to pull out that example, and it's the matchmaking service that all game developers want to use, making it work on every cloud service provider in a very seamless and transparent way is hard unless you're going to invest in like doing a version of it for everybody. So until you're like a really big SaaS company with private cloud versions of your software, which means you're probably at millions of dollars of revenue scale minimum before you can even think about that, you just don't do it, which means that you don't do the normal things that happen in an open source ecosystem, which is people can create a software module, share it, and it can grow organically based on what people like to do, and it just runs everywhere. That has not happened in gaming. It's happened in one interesting category, which is like Salesforce Cloud, I think is a good example where if you have total dominance and you own the social graph, so to speak, and the data around that, and you've become, in their case, kind of the de facto standard for contacts and sales outreach, then you can get everybody to come and build on top of that and build software modules, because Salesforce Cloud is that. It's literally like the scalable compute layer that lets you build software applications around it, whether you're doing in-house development for your company or you want to use a third-party vendor. They have mechanisms for monetizing that and building on their network. But doing it like for something like gaming has not happened yet, and probably can't happen just the way game development happens, right? Like there is no one company that owns the way you do games. It is already a decentralized development approach, whether you're using Unity or Unreal on the front end, and there's all different platforms to target and different distribution channels. So gaming really needs this much more open source, open technology. And that's kind of why we ended up seeing that DePIN was going to be the solution for this. Ken and Ali, I'll just open it up to either of you. Like Ken, I see you jumping in.
Oh yeah, I've got a lot to say. So, I might have to unwind this a little bit, but because there's a bunch of different points you hit on that I think are valid, but maybe giving a concrete example of where Beamable's composability is useful to Tashi. So in the Tashi DePIN, our job is to set up a multiplayer serverless session. But that requires that there's like some type of discoverability and handshake that happens before that session starts, including things like how do we handle NATs and firewalls, right? And so we have a whole process of handshaking that works with. And I know when Ali and I were talking about how to do this, the answer was pretty straightforward. Because first of all, I don't want to write matchmaking. That's not in my wheelhouse. There's all kinds of flavors of matchmaking. There's caveats and all kinds of heuristics that are involved in that. I don't want to be involved in that equation because I'm already building a consensus protocol and that's already complicated enough. But one of the things that was really cool when I was talking to Ali was like, yeah, use our matchmaking and just write a C# script that kicks out the session details. So already, because of the software layer composability, I can actually use the Beamable SDK to do the matchmaking and generate the configuration file that then gets handed to each of the players for how do they discover each other and how do they connect with each other. So there were some already, I mean, that was a very concrete example of how two projects in the Web3 space can leverage composability. Now, the next point is, you got to have a place to run this code. And so right now, you're going to be running them in data centers or in the cloud, however that gets run. But there are lots of DePINs out there that are saying, hey, we've got compute standing by ready to be used. So a lot of this composable code that you guys have built a marketplace for can be run nearer the players than a data center might be. One of the challenges, but also promises of DePIN, especially for Tashi, is like, especially for low latency services like game synchronization or state synchronization, you can't have much latency. So if you're in Indonesia and your nearest game server is in the Philippines or in Japan, you're going to have inherent network latency that's going to decrease the gaming experience for you if you're in Indonesia and you just want to play with your neighbors. You don't want to play with somebody around the world. You just want to play with the kid next door. Having DePIN, where you've got resources that are idle, that are in Indonesia, that are next door, takes you from 200 milliseconds down to 20 milliseconds of network latency, only because we're using underutilized resources. So there are lots of promises of DePIN. So I can imagine a scenario where the Beamable composable software customer might actually be like a Flux device sitting in Indonesia that triggers a Tashi game session. So you can already see we've got 3 different DePINs that could be used where Beamable's the entry point, hands off the Flux for the execution to generate the game session that now hands it off to a peer-to-peer session that just uses Tashi for that, for the stability and the reliability of that session. So in that scenario, you can see how composing DePINs actually improves the experience for game developers and game players. And that's a key component, right? The key component is that right now everybody's going to default to AWS or Azure or Google Cloud. As you said, we got PlayFab on Azure. But all of those projects right now are struggling, and they're struggling so much they're giving away $100,000 to $500,000 in credit to startups. So we have to be competitive at the beginning with the service, like what is it we're actually delivering that's better, the lack of friction, how is it easier than the incumbent? So this is where crypto becomes a friction point. And to your point, which is commendable, is we have to take that friction point off the table. And then the long-term vision. So from a price perspective, because as a game developer, everybody is dreading when that credit balance expires, right? Our runway ends when that credit expires, and we have to have grown our player base sufficiently to beat that. And what we're saying is, instead of having a service that potentially could break you, what if the services could scale with the demand? And so that's another one of the promises from a cost perspective for the gaming side.
When you mentioned 200 milliseconds to 20 milliseconds, it took me back to the LAN days. Kid in Indonesia playing with his neighbor. I mean, that's like bring back LAN with DePIN.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's the cool thing about it is with DePIN, if the orchestration is done right. So maybe it's fair to explain how most DePINs are constructed. Most DePINs have an orchestration layer, which is your entry point into those resources. And that orchestration layer is usually made up of trusted participants. So either they have staked a certain amount that they can participate in the orchestration layer, or in the beginning, they might even be centralized and run by the company that the project that's setting it up. We have an orchestration layer, which you can think of as like the entry point or the interface or the API into the resource pool that's available. And one of the responsibilities of an orchestration layer is to route jobs. So if I've got 5 kids who want to play in Indonesia, one of the roles of the orchestration layer is to go, okay, cool. Which resource nodes, which of at the DePIN layer are available with the lowest latency to the average latency between these players in Indonesia, right? And that's really what we're looking at doing from an orchestration. So that's a massive promise versus I have to go set up a data center if I want to get competitive performance, right? If I want to get comparable performance, someone's got to go set up a data center in Indonesia, and that's just not going to happen. Well, I'm not going to say it's not going to happen. Indonesia is going to blow up. It's the next big gaming space.
It's a little bit of a sidebar away from composability, but worth maybe looking at for a moment. Actually, maybe there is a composability aspect to it, which is what we're doing in DePIN when it comes to compute is providing liquidity around essentially a new asset class. So we have this already in markets like energy, for example. So energy can be traded. And if you're an energy producer, it can be routed a variety of different ways and traded until it eventually gets to your house where you turn your lights on, right? So it's not like the old days where it was the coal burning factory a few towns over that just supplied power to your neighborhood. We've got smart grids now, and energy is traded around. So there has arisen a whole financial infrastructure around the trade of energy. That doesn't really exist for compute yet. So compute is still this very siloed service. So you go to Amazon and they tell you what they want for the cost of a server, or you go to Azure, or you go to GCP. Those are the hyperscalers. But there's also a whole universe of bare metal service providers. So companies like servers.com and i3D and Gcore. So all these guys, and they operate data centers around the world. So what you were just describing, Ken, is actually a market-based approach to how you satisfy the supply side of this equation. So your example of like Indonesia or wherever, the better example than in Indonesia might be, you essentially let the market decide that having data centers in that particular region is valuable. Let them monetize according to what their underlying CapEx actually looks like, and have a competitive market for it too, right? So in DePIN, people can join the network. Now, in the case of the Beamable network, we're focused on these top tier, like enterprise grade, bare metal service providers joining our network so that we effectively have like a global virtual hyperscaler built out of all these regional suppliers. But for example, if you had that kind of data center capacity in Indonesia and you wanted to bring your data center online, we would be happy to have you join the network, assuming you met the technical standards for being a container provider on our network. And you price it according to what you want to price it at. And then games that route traffic to you are essentially doing a handshake, going through an order book and provisioning it off of you based on what the market will bear, as opposed to just having these super siloed providers who usually are adding pretty significant margin. Like we're seeing a reduction in the underlying cost structure on the order of 70% going from a hyperscaler to a bare metal service provider. And that's on compute. And then bandwidth is often like 90% less. So like there's a lot of upcharging built into the typical hyperscaler business model. Not that they're doing anything wrong. Like they're also market participants just charging what the market will demand. And what you're paying for there is servers on tap. Like they have millions of servers and you can just provision them at will. You pay for that. You pay a lot for that capability. But in aggregate, you can bring all the compute together. But the point I was making is liquidity around this asset class. So now compute is just something you can order from anyone who can provide it at the quality level you want, in the region you want, and at the price you want. And you can then tap into that and build software around it and do it in an open way. You don't have to have one particular service provider, and then adding additional data center support means essentially porting all your code base and infrastructure and automation scripts and all that stuff all over the place. You're not in your head, Martin.
Yeah, just to chime in real quick here,
Yeah,
a couple of points that have been brought up. So one thing Ken said earlier was it can be transparent or opaque, and I think that's very relevant in what you're describing, John. And it's also relevant to the point that crypto shouldn't be a friction in this particular case. And the reason is we're already seeing sort of this shift where, people are coming to this realization that one of the really valuable use cases of crypto is as the backbone of financial infrastructure and but it's like a behind the scenes concern, right? And so we're seeing, for example, USDC transaction volume exceed the Visa and MasterCard networks at this point. More USDC transfers, in real dollars than, Visa and MasterCard combined, which is very, very significant. It shows that there is a shift towards some of this crypto transfer infrastructure in the background. But that's not because people are using more USDC transfers. When was the last time you paid anything with USDC at a store or whatever? You're not generally doing that. Maybe you never will. We don't know. We'll see what the future holds. But it certainly is the case that in the background, this stuff is happening. I think the same could be said for DePIN. So for a lot of game studios and game developers, they're not going to know or care about any of this stuff. What they care about is high performance, low cost, and a good experience for the players, right? And so for that, you can put gateways. In this case, the gateways are going to be technology vendors like ourselves, Beamable, etc. People still pay us in plain old US dollars, fiat currency type of thing. And what we will do is basically place the order on their behalf, and we'll ingest that complexity so that the end user doesn't have to. Now, to speak back to the sort of opaque versus transparent, if somebody wants to bypass us completely and tap into the DePIN network, they have a path to do that. They don't need to go through Beamable. We make it easier. The part of the value we provide, in addition to our higher value services, is abstracting away that complexity. But if somebody wants to take a container and give it to the DePIN and say, hey, here, run it, and here's my wallet, go deduct some token or currency from it, they'll have that option to do it. So that flexibility and that transparency gives you the best of both worlds. The ability to adopt the complexity if you want to, but also the ability to do it in a very simple and easy way if you want to do that.
And we even saw the ability to create that you're talking about kind of a business abstraction layer where you can come in and pay with stablecoin, or as people outside of crypto call it, dollars, and just have like the simplified interface where you don't have to know anything about any of that.
And we're getting into the economics of this, right? So this is kind of near and dear to my heart on the economic side. I think stable coins are going to become very important. I think there's another trend that's starting to happen, which is reward and loyalty points around internally. And I think because there's some tax optimizations that come with rewards and loyalty points, you do have to do KYC, and there are regulatory requirements around it. But the idea that the participants in your network from a node operator perspective, whether they're a data center that is underutilized or somebody's gaming computer that's underutilized, they can participate in the economics of it. And with rewards and loyalty points, they're pegged to some fiat currency. Like they have to be from an accountability and a compliance perspective. And so stable coins become very, very important, even when you're looking at some of those kind of extended reward models that might be more tax efficient and also compatible. So the cool thing is if you have a stable coin as the intermediary between projects, settlement between different projects gets much easier.
Yes.
When you have Tashi token and a Beamable token, we don't know what the value of those tokens are at any given time of the day. And right. Granted, you can leverage exchanges to coordinate the settlement of those, but there's a speculative and volatility component to that. So I definitely see that stable coins are going to become a massive component for a lot of what we're doing. And it does actually help with the accounting. And from a transparency perspective, I mean, we see like GeoDnet, who is taking the revenue and converting it, I think, into USDC, but into a stable coin. And you can see on chain what their revenue is and how that's getting used. So they're one of the few projects that actually is very transparent with their revenue activity.
So it parallels what happened in decentralized finance, right? So stable coins became extremely critical there. I just glanced at a little report. Current value locked of stable coins in decentralized finance is 228 billion. Probably not the exact leading edge number, because I think that number is a couple of weeks out of date. 228 billion in stable coins. Like if you didn't realize that it's that much in the crypto economy. And we're not talking about, like, yes, Ethereum, Bitcoin, some of the bigger coins out there represent even bigger market caps than that. But that's like the fiat currency that you're used to is locked into decentralized finance at really substantial scale. And that was a big part of what made decentralized finance and some of these decentralized exchanges and all kinds of lending protocols actually start to take off within that. So yeah, stablecoins are going to play a huge role in decentralized physical infrastructure networks, DePIN as well, for similar reasons, which is it's a medium of exchange, which reduces volatility. It's a place to pay for things. We realized in building the Beamable DePIN that you needed to be able to price services in two ways for people that want to be able to receive the token, which is some of our suppliers will want to be able to receive the token. It's also the way we provide sort of the added incentives to join the network, to be available on the network. That's always paid in network token, independent of stablecoin. But if you want to price your services in stablecoin, make sure that like you know exactly what you're going to get paid. And by the way, game studios also want to know exactly what they're going to pay. We think that most people are probably going to transact in stable coins most of the time for a lot of their payments. And then the native token will be used for a lot of added incentives to participate in the network beyond that. So there's that. The stablecoin is sort of one of the really interesting examples of just general composability for all things on Web3. One of the things I was getting at, though, is Ali's earlier point where Beamable.com is like a SaaS gateway that lets you pay in fiat, swipe the credit card, get services, download an SDK that is not crypto native in terms of how you use it. You just use the SDK, build your game as normal, don't have to know anything about Web3. That's an example of composability. But I think the other thing Ali was pointing out is you could interact with Web3 natively. So it exists as a protocol, so you don't need to go through that level. You could do that on your own if you wanted to. But I think the logical extension of that, which I don't want to have missed, is we think there should be a competitive ecosystem for the Beamable.coms as well, right? So if you want to build another front-end gateway into the protocol and bill people directly, go for it. Like that's not wrong. Like the protocol literally exists to allow anybody to become a service provider on it as well. And we would love to see that happen. In fact, game industry is so large, $200 billion plus industry, and there's so many niches and genres and areas of specialization within it. Like we know that we'll have won at the point that someone says, here's sort of a niche in the gaming industry that Beamable didn't realize was there or didn't have enough support for. We're going to super specialize in this. We are going to, I don't know, I'll make something up. We are going to be the masters of the whole next generation of RTS games, for example. Right. We know exactly what an RTS game needs. Push a button, stand up your RTS backend, everything is there. And we have RTS experts in our hands-on implementation services team. They'll work hand in glove with your development team and away you go. Like that's what I want to have happen, where like you get that specialist expertise, but they're building off of us. You don't have to go to Beamable.com for that. Build your RTS Beam company and build off the protocol. You know that all the services infrastructure is there and you can unlock all of this scalable infrastructure without having to build it yourself. And now your differentiated value is your expertise in a market, right, as opposed to having to reinvent all the technology.
Well, I love that vision for a lot of reasons. But the important thing to think about that is like, what are the token economics, or what are the economic incentives that are built around it? Because like for what we're doing is we've used token incentives to incentivize certain activities on the network. So if there's a high demand area with a low supply, you're going to get some type of bonus and reward points. And so we're incentivizing that type of activity. But what you've done, which I think is really cool, because, you know, all of us if we've ever built a product company, we always have like a sister service company or division, right? That's responsible for custom stuff. What you've done is taken that to the next level. You've shifted that over and said, we have a product company but we're also building a framework that you can build your own product and services company on top of the same technology. Now, I suspect that there's also token incentives for you to continue to support that framework, right? There's some type of incentive model there so that even if somebody comes up and is an RTS competitor, RTS specific competitor Beamable, there's still an upside for the Beamable DePIN project to continue. And that is one of the beauties of how DePIN works. I mean, we were talking about stablecoins. I worked on a project that was Shinhan Bank and Standard Charter doing settlement, cross-border settlement. And to your point, John, the reason why stablecoin is so useful is because there are efficiencies that come with blockchain and stablecoin that we got to leverage in a cross-border settlement between two banks, one in Korea, one in South Africa. And it was incredible, the efficiencies you got. Similarly, if you build your tokenomics right, you're incentivized to help other people solve problems that you don't have the bandwidth to solve, and they're incentivized to go make money solving that problem. And so there's this is the value mutualization I was talking about earlier. The idea that there are different participants in a value chain, and we're all incentivized towards the same or towards an optimal outcome. Sometimes we don't know what that outcome is going to be, but if we're optimally incentivized towards an outcome that's profitable, then you're going to have a more robust and a more reliable and a continually evolving technology stack. And this is where Web3 is uniquely positioned compared to other places. Because in other places, I can always be a reseller or a certified technician for AWS servers. I can do that all day long. But AWS isn't incentivized to support my business specifically. Right. And quite frankly, I'm not directly incentivized to even use AWS. It just happens to be the tool that happened to be in the toolbox at the time. Mm-hmm. While in this case, it's like, well, no. If we figure out the tokenomics of these joint economies and of these technologies, how do we integrate these technologies? And then we align the incentives on the economics. Like I can already think like there are going to be things that Tashi is going to be building on top of the Beamable stack. I'm already thinking about this now that you've said that. I'm thinking there are specific game types that I'm going to set up a studio and we're going to focus on this game type because it uses Tashi optimally. But I also know that I need the Beamable stack for all these other things that I don't have. And specifically a lot of that like composable code stuff that I want to be in like data center grade compute. Right. Yes. And so that's the interesting thing about it. But that kind of all comes back to value mutualizations. How do we think of all the participants in this ecosystem as participants in a value chain that has a common desired outcome that incentivizes all of us to get to that outcome?
And Ali, I want to tee up a question for you here because one of the things you really spotted about the DePIN we were building is not only all of the composability we talked about so far, which has been building on top of the core set of services that Beamable already delivers within our game server architecture, or what we just talked about, the ability to plug in at the Web3 level or at the sort of abstraction layer. But you also saw this opportunity to grow horizontally as well. So once we've got this DePIN set up, which delivers our core services, which is basically the enabler there is containerized compute, right? So now that we have a containerized compute network, you saw this opportunity to really start reaching out to all of the vendors out there that have any kind of technology that they can deploy through containerized compute and start bringing them onto the network so that we've got not only things that are sort of natively built on our SDK, but all the other services that could be scaled up, right? That's another form of composability. Do you want to comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that to Ken's point, to your point earlier, like I think success is that we have our competitors on the DePIN network as well. I mean, that's what I want to see. I
don't know that there are competitors in the future, but keep going.
Sure. But it's just odd. It's a funny thing when you start to reason in this term, which I like very much, is value mutualization term. It turns competitors into allies, right? It's like, okay, well, everybody join on, right? Which is a beautiful thing. But I think what I've seen over and over again is that people have been talking about adopting bare metal in some way, shape, or form for a long time now. A lot of people would love nothing better than to do it. Hey, we were also looking into that, but it's extraordinarily difficult to marshal the engineering resources and the willpower and the opportunity cost to sort of say, this is what we're going to do for the next few months or for the next year. We're going to revamp our cloud architecture to be hybrid cloud, where we're going to have a base amount on our bare metal, and then we'll still have some amount on the big cloud providers, because we can't afford to run out of capacity on any given data center. So we need to have a foot in AWS and a foot, or a GCP or Azure, and a foot in the bare metal. And then we're going to architect this so that we can burst up at peak hours. Like, that's tremendous amounts of engineering complexity. Now, the benefit can be well worth it. Again, we're talking about a 60 to 70% reduction, but the cost of getting it wrong is that you lose your revenue. And there's nothing people are more allergic to than losing their revenue, right? Like, people love cost savings. People hate losing revenue more than they love cost savings, right? So, so I think part of the benefit here is to really facilitate that onboarding process, to make it way easier to tap not into one bare metal provider, one cloud hyperscaler, but to actually make them one and the same. There's essentially one source of capacity. That's what you're going to use, and it includes the aggregated supply of cloud and bare metal and so forth and so on. And for us, we sort of spotted this neat little benefit. Ken mentioned earlier, this notion of, he doesn't want to be a matchmaking expert, and good. You shouldn't have to be a matchmaking expert, because it is freaking hard. But we've heard this over and over again, right? We have game server orchestrators we've worked with various other service providers who, they just want to deliver their service, and they want others to focus on the other stuff. And unfortunately, when game studios come up to them and say, hey, Ken, I really love Tashi and I really want to use Tashi, but do you have matchmaking? Do you have parties? Do you have lobbies? Ken is then in the uncomfortable position of having to say either no, I don't, and then risk losing the customer, or saying, yeah, I'll build that for you, don't worry about it, which then he's expanded his service area, and it's a nightmare, and he's committed his team, and they're going to hate him for it, and so forth and so on. So the better alternative we discovered is to have a marketplace where Ken can say, hey, look, we don't actually provide matchmaking, but Beamable does. We have a very smooth and easy integration. If you use Beamable or X number of others, you'll have a very easy and fast path to Tashi. So that same philosophy is what we want to apply here, where people can focus on their differentiator and leave all of this infrastructure concern, all this undifferentiated heavy lifting, which nonetheless carries massive complexity and cost and risk, etc., to the DePIN network and to the actors whose specialization it is to deal with those.
So I'm going to do a quick station identification here, but while I'm doing that, I want you to think of another question, though, which is, let's look into the future. What does it mean for all these massive incumbents that own millions of servers? So the hyperscalers, Azure and GCP, like, is the world changing in a really fundamental way for them? Is this a replay of what happened to time-sharing services? I don't know, you guys might be too young for this, but like, there was once a business called time-shared computers when we had mainframes, and you had to like split up the mainframe into slices that different companies would use the same mainframe. This is kind of pre-internet. Internet existed, but not really used at scale at the time of time-sharing services. Are these hyperscalers going to go through the same experience that time-sharing services did over the next few years? But here's the station identification. So you're watching the Web3 game developers live stream, and we are a live program. The reason we do this live is so that you have an opportunity to ask questions, to comment, even join the channel, by the way. Like, we can get you a link from Oscar, and you can jump on here and you can talk about DePIN and composability, frankly, anything that you think is pertinent to Web3 game development this week. Love to have you join in. We are having a technical problem today, which is, for some reason, X choked early on in the video delivery and stopped delivering on X. So if you're watching this and you're on X, you're watching it in replay, because we're going to rebroadcast this again on X so that no one misses out on X. but we're only live on YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook at the moment, and love all of you who took part of your day to come and listen to this. The audience has been growing enormously. We've got a great audience present, even though X choked out. Elon, we love you, but fix your shit, man. Come on, let's get this stuff working. I know you're busy integrating X into XAI. Maybe that's the higher priority today. But we would love video to be working in. We'll try to get the broadcast going. If you have a question, post it on YouTube, post it on LinkedIn, post it on Facebook, and we'll answer your question here, or let Oscar know that you want to join. But this will be available in rebroadcast in X, and we look forward to all of you coming back for future episodes, hopefully with X working properly and live so that the live audience on X gets to participate as well. All right, so let's return to the question I had around the future. How disruptive is this technology, Ken? What's going to happen to the current hyperscaler business?
I mean, the same thing that happened to the data center business when everybody moved to cloud. It's just going to have to pivot. It's going to have to figure out its new place in the world, and it's going to shrink in market share. The reality is, though, is that there's just so much demand for compute. Part of what we're trying to do is utilize underutilized resources. Because there's one side that says we can just go buy a whole bunch more computers and shove them into data centers. There's another angle that says, hey, we've already got a bunch of resources that are sitting idle most of the day. Why don't we go and orchestrate the usage of those, kind of the time shared compute, but in a more dynamic and economically aligned way. So I absolutely believe that, just as AWS moved from a bookstore to an online everything store to now selling their underutilized resources that were meant to be built for their bookstore, we're going to see that same thing happen where they're going to have to shift into something else. And quite frankly, I think they're probably going to end up playing the DePIN game at some point and joining us. And if we can do the economics and the interface right, I mean, think about what's happened with agentics, right? We've now have an entire standard for discovery and allocation of agentic AI out there. So I can now go out and find an agent that's interesting to me, and I just have a single interface for querying that. I think what we're going to see in DePIN is the maturation of that type of interface. And if AWS wants to continue playing the infrastructure game, they're going to adopt that interface. And now AWS becomes one of the resource providers for the set of global DePINs at some point. And I'm totally fine with that. I mean, it's not that I have anything against AWS. What I have an issue with is vendor lock-in and unfair practices and games being shut down. Yeah.
Ollie, what do you think?
I have a similar but a little bit different take from Ken here. I think that it's gonna look. The fact is, AWS, GCP, they have some extraordinarily valuable services. They have some really fantastic services and really great SLA guarantees that candidly are hard to match by a lot of bare metal providers. And I've heard this even from partners of ours who have made the journey, who have sort of swallowed the difficult pill of having bare metal and AWS, where they say, look, we've had tremendous cost efficiencies on bare metal. We don't regret that journey at all, but we still find ourselves leaning on AWS for certain reliability concerns where latency or uptime are of critical in sort of value. So I think that, look, the reality is that AWS, GCP, and others do have not just more capacity than anybody else, but they also have a certain level of SLA commitments and guarantees that is hard to match by many bare metal providers. Now, the good news is most of the times, to your earlier point, John, you don't need necessarily those SLA guarantees, and you're paying for them anyway. So I think there's going to be an element of you're going to get better efficiency. It's going to allow the bare metal providers to compete and to get better over time as well. So I do think there's going to be some more competitive pressure with the cloud providers. But I also think that that's going to be largely countermanded by the fact that the AWS and GCPs will be able to sell their value-added services more efficiently to a broader market. So they'll be able to actually, they have some like Aurora DB and others, BigQuery and so forth. These are very, very valuable services. I don't think those are going to go away. I think what's going to happen is, if anything, they're going to be able to sell more of those and charge very competitively for them. So I think ultimately the pie will grow, and I think even the cloud providers will stand to benefit. For the record, AWS and GCP have been trying to create a market-based approach to services for years now, and they have struggled to do so. And you can point to all kinds of reasons, but I think this provides potentially a more sustainable model, much like Linux and Unix-based system provided a more sustainable model over proprietary technologies. So I think ultimately everybody will benefit, and there's going to be a painful adaptation to some extent, but I think it'll be gradual.
I mean, that's already happening. Like they're already on DePIN, right? So I mean, of course, the reality is when we talk about any kind of Web3 node or the various validators and proof of work, proof of stake, it doesn't really matter. A hell of a lot of that stuff is running on traditional cloud service providers, like as much as decentralization has been talked about in Web3, a lot of these projects are centrally dependent on Amazon, at least today. So in DePIN, Amazon and GCP and Azure and Oracle, these guys are going to continue to provide services to DePIN and operate nodes. In some cases, it'll be because individuals go and they're like, hey, I can stand up a Beamable node or a Tashi node on Amazon. It's easy to do. I can push a button and launch the software there. So why not? Like, people will do that and they'll just use existing infrastructure, right? So that'll happen. Ultimately, you would think that the hyperscalers will also participate directly in those markets, kind of take out the middleman and just monetize that way. Just like going back to the energy analogy, this played out in energy as well. There were energy monopolies, and then they started to find that they could get access to lower cost energy and therefore higher margin energy that they could bring their customers in their service areas. And that's why energy networks started getting more and more integrated. So I would think you'd see the same thing in the hyperscaler markets as well. And that's like, if I want to think about what the future is, it's the commodification of compute as a resource. I want compute to be just like energy, a tradable liquid resource that, depending on your needs, your quality requirements, your latency requirements, like whatever those are, you just have access to compute and you tell it what you're willing to pay. And if there's someone willing to meet that demand with their supply, you're matched and compute appears. If we can do that, then I think that's a really positive future for developers, for end users, because that means a lot more margin left over for creators, right? So as a creator building an application or building a game, you have more margin left so that you can do things like build a better game. And then the end user benefits because they have more choices amongst higher quality games and higher quality applications, where more of the dollars that they're spending are being reinvested into those applications and games, as opposed to what people don't realize, which is when you swipe the credit card on a game, first of all, usually 30% is coming off the top just for the distribution channel, be it Steam or iOS, or short of you buying a PC game directly from the developer, you're paying usually 30%. And then after that, you're paying a lot of marketing costs that are baked into their pricing if you reply to an ad, for example, to find that game. And then you're definitely paying for their back-end compute needs, which is taking up a significant portion of their budget. We're seeing a budget very often with games like on the order of 20% of their total budget is going to live services generally, which is both the direct marginal costs of the infrastructure like AWS, labor, et cetera. And it goes way up there. I think the latest number I saw on Roblox was like 37% of their top line was live services costs. So like, this is a problem for everybody. Even the most scaled out, super large companies are spending way too much on this, and it eats up the value creation that can then be delivered to you as a person. So if we commodify it, and then this hyperscalers kind of are in the business of being the most efficient operators, and we use market forces through an order book to make it so that they have pressure to price according to what the market will bear in comparison to like all the bare metal service providers out there. I think that would be a great thing. So whether they are there or not, I think that they'll have a decision to make as to whether they want to play in a commodity market or whether they want to try to continue to build vendor lock-in with software layers on top of that to keep people there. And I think that's an area where a lot of people are getting increasingly hesitant because of the sort of the disruption that they've had in the past. So I'll ask for a couple of closing comments, but we're at the top of our hour. I feel like we could talk about composability and DePIN and all this stuff for hours and hours and hours, and we will. Last comment, we did have a little bit of disruption with X. It looks like X picked up and unchoked at some point during this, so some of you joined us late. We're going to rebroadcast the whole episode, so if you're on X, you're not going to miss a thing. We're going to put it up again. It's also on YouTube, LinkedIn. You can go to a whole variety of different places for this. But we're going to return again tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern time, where we're going to be talking with a couple of really smart AI and gaming developers, one called Nilo, which is building a vibe coding platform for games, and also Wanderheart, which is building essentially a virtual dungeon master. And really, really cool. I hope you'll check out that talk. And we'll see you tomorrow. But Ken, any closing comments you want to share with everybody?
First, we need to get X engineers to stop vibe coding. That's the problem that's happening. They're using Grok to vibe code right now. And by the way, your topic tomorrow is actually the topic I suggested might come up today. So if you want me to jump in on that one, I'm happy to do that as well.
Nice, Ken. It's an open platform. You come anytime.
Yeah.
That's for anybody. Join
it.
us in any of these talks.
Yeah, but I think in closing, the vision that I see here is, you talked about the cost savings, which means that there's more money that can go back into the game development, into the game experience, which I think is important. Also extending that runway for game developers to have sufficient time to build that player base, because it's always a race between, can I grow the revenue against my runway, my burn rate, and see if I can solve that problem. So there's an efficiency component there as well. But I think one of the big, really cool, promising opportunities here, and I know I've talked to Dennis Dyax on YouTube watching right now, but I know he and I had hours of discussion about the idea that if we do this right, as a game developer, when I'm done supporting the game, I'm out. Game players can keep playing. As long as somebody's paying the DePIN to keep those services going, the game continues. So creating almost these immortal games that outlive the developer, and maybe even potentially create a revenue stream for the developer. So it could flip the entire gaming industry's business model on its head. So that's the long-term vision I have for this whole strategy. I'm just trying to take the multiplayer server cost out and coordinate with all the people who are specializing in all the other things. And if we build this framework right, just like energy, where we have a grid and we've got power purchase agreements for solar panels on your house that participates in supplying energy to the grid. Like all of these things are participants all over. And the more we can push that participation to the edge and allow even potentially game players to participate in the economics of this, like the more sustainable this becomes. So that's the big hype vision right there of what we're trying to do in the gaming space in DePIN.
I love the solar panel analogy. Ali, take us home here.
Ken actually, this is a testament to our alignment here, but like Ken really stole. You both said two things that I was planning to bring up in closing, which is Roblox and ultimately transforming the game industry. I mean, for me as a game developer, as a game technology person, like what I care about is making the lives of game developers better and easier and allowing more creativity to enter into the space. And unfortunately, game developers have been crushed by poor value distribution, being squeezed out of margins of their own creations, right? Very sad. And then on top of that, the infrastructure costs are just crushing on their own, right? Like, and this is not just for games, but across the board. But game workloads are the most stringent in terms of compute and bandwidth, because oftentimes they approximate reality to the greatest degree, right? So in many ways, I would love to see a world where we could build something of the value proposition of Roblox, which is the infrastructure costs are effectively zero, right? And eventually for this economy to go beyond the game developers and even potentially enter the hands of the players for those that want to participate in it. There's probably some version of this circular economy that allows game developers to get free infrastructure and allows all kinds of novel game game concepts that we haven't even thought up yet. It's like the microchip moment. It's like, what can you make with a microchip? I don't know. Let's find out. So yeah, excited for the future.
All right, Ali. Great. We're going to close on that. Thank you, everybody, for watching and taking a part of your day to join us here in the Web3 Game Developer live stream. We will see you tomorrow for game development in general. We're going to be talking AI and gaming. Until next time, see you, everybody. Thank you.